And when Hollyoaks goes later, it definitely gets a whole lot darker. I do want to immediately just make the big disclaimer. First, there will obviously be spoilers about what happens in Hollyoaks later. And I also want to make an immediate trigger warning because we will be talking about some pretty heinous acts of violence and of a sexual nature. I'm trying to say this in a way that the first minute of YouTube won't take the money away. But point being, there is a very vivid and a very almost disgustingly depicted attack in this episode, and we will be talking about it. So I just think it's important to air it now and say, if that would upset you, don't watch this. Probably don't watch the Hollyoaks later, because if it will deeply affect you, it's not worth compromising your mental health. So just want to make that disclaimer very apparent right now, because it gets really dark really quick. So what happens in the Hollyoaks later? Well, it starts off, we get two major focuses. We get the teens partying in Liverpool, and we get now, if I say Mick and Donnie, it was revealed that Donnie and Mick Johnson, his Brookside character, are the same person. So, you know, they might be interchangeably moved. And it's them being chased by two gunmen. It's Warren, Mick's son, Gemma, who is played by former Hollyoaks Steph Britton, Tisha Merry. And they're getting chased by gunmen. We also see Teresa. And yeah, so where do I go in first? Let's ease in with a bit more of the party. We don't see as much of the village. The village is that's in the other episodes. This one's for the later. So the teens are all partying. They're all taking drugs. They're all doing ecstasy. And they are drinking, going drugs. So they go out, they go to a club. Lucas is still upset that Dylan isn't really interested in him and is basically trying to do anything to get Dylan's attention. But Dylan is out on the relationship after learning that Lucas has been hit, and Steve doesn't really want to be dealing with it. So they all take drugs. Charlie's a bit of a dick. We're teasing Charlie and Vicky, which oh Christ. Yeah, they've been teasing Charlie and Vicky, which has not really been built up before then, but it is now, and they're kind of getting together. Frankie is trying to have some fun in this time of worry, and she meets Esme Dixon, who is the daughter of Jackie Dixon, another Brookside character, who is played by Alex Fletcher, who plays Diane Hutchinson. It's a bit of a scramble, I know. And we also see Lucas get tanked up on drugs and then basically threaten to throw himself off a balcony, which Dylan finds and stops. And then obviously he says, once again, Lucas being quite manipulative, essentially says, "You won't leave me though, will you?" And obviously Dylan says, "No, I won't." And this is while Donnie, Warren, and Gemma are hiding away. We get a little bunk up between Gemma and Warren, and then we have the gunmen finally corner Warren, Donnie, and Gemma. They shoot Gemma, who takes the bullet, but she doesn't die. And Dodger gets involved. Dodger finds Teresa smuggling diamonds across the border. She offers to she wants him to turn a blind eye and almost hits on him to try and get him to not confess about what he's seen. And this is as Dodger gets called away to try and help Donnie and Warren. Dodger gets caught up and they're kind of caught at a standstill. Warren leaves, so it is just Donnie, Dodger, and Gemma. And once again, now we're going to talk about the darker parts of this episode, and I'll try and talk about the slightly lighter moments in there, to try and add a bit of brevity, add a bit of kind of time away to think about it. So these two guards, who are sadistic. And we later learn that Gemma, Donnie's daughter from Brookside, has paid them in order to try and steal Warren's diamonds that Teresa was smuggling. And so they take Donnie into the bedroom, they viciously attack him and beat him up. And then Sully, the guy with the mustache and top knot hair, he beats up Donnie, and then he gestures to the other guy to beat up Dodger, and Dodger faces a very severe assault. And once again, trigger warning, here we go. In the act, this disgusting human being, he viciously sexually assaults Dodger, and takes advantage of him and violates him. And the reason why this has become so contentious is because usually in soaps, it's a lot of pre-watershed kind of stuff. So a lot of the darker things are implied. Unfortunately, or even, I don't know, perhaps fortunately with how kind of it has been depicted, it's a very, very grim reality, and it's a very intimate look at this. As we see, it's a very... Usually in times like these, some people may misunderstand what's happening. There are no misunderstandings here. Exactly what I've said happened, and almost it goes on for too long, and as an audience, you could understand the shock and the horror of seeing such a dark thing being depicted so vividly. And it's definitely caused a lot of shock amongst the audience, because it is very dark and it's very kind of disturbing. It's hideous, it's grim, it's disgusting, it's disturbing. And I don't really know how to kind of defend it in its way, but I think the way I've explained it to myself is most of the Hollyoaks laters often have something really, really shocking that will sit with the audience for good. They'll have something really, really depraved, something that wouldn't typically be seen in normal Hollyoaks, that will kind of scare the audience, and, it will really take a toll, because it's resonate with a lot of people, and it's hurt a lot of people. And, male sexual abuse is unfortunately very common, and to see it be portrayed in such a overt way could be deeply upsetting to a lot of people. And why I say about Hollyoaks later often having this sort of darker tone to it is because there have been the really kind of darker parts of the episodes, like seeing Sarah Barnes with the parachute and she just falls to her death, or I don't remember all the names, but there was the Hollyoaks later where they all go to the festival and they all stay at this like drug house as such, and you basically see that the dealer's running it and the woman stays there, but the woman's basically used as a bargaining chip. The woman there is basically used for sex, like a bargaining chip, or just, for any non-specific reason. And that's her life, and she's accepted it. It often tries to depict these much darker issues that wouldn't have a place in normal Hollyoaks, or at least not in such an overt way. So, and we've kind of talked about there being ramifications for a big topical issue. Where it was I believe it was a Stephen Patterson article in the Metro saying there'll be a big topical, like, social issue that will be carried into 2026, and perhaps, Dodger reacting to this assault and dealing with it and processing it. Maybe that'll be a big long-term story, seeing how Dodger deals in the aftermath. Joanne Smith in the chat says, people are already complaining about the episode, saying it's a disgrace. I'll get onto the review later, but I think that it's a very bold move, and Hannah Cheers has shown her almost potency to want to go for these much darker issues. I mean, what are Hannah Cheers' biggest storylines? You have the Frankie and JJ sibling sexual abuse storyline and human exploitation. These are darker issues that are being depicted, so I kind of just think it's her MO. This is what her direction wants to be. I understand the shock, and I think it's perfectly like reasonable for a lot of people to be upset. It was I think everybody who watched it will understand why, and I feel like a lot of us will kind of have to think about it, and it probably won't leave our brains for a while. It probably won't, it's quite hard to process. Paul Flint, new subscriber, says this was very dark. Yeah, it was really dark. But I think the potential, and I'm going to talk about this from the sense of like, I'm trying to talk about it from like, as Hollyoaks will look at this. I think the potential to take Dodger, who first is a policeman and a man in a field where male sexual violence isn't taken particularly seriously, and now Dodger in a pretty removed position from his family. He's been isolated from Sienna and Cleo, and we don't know how Liberty feels about him, but he's also lost his dad, he's lost his gran. Isolated from his family, now has to process the trauma and process the grief of what's happened to him. And I think if this is done well, it can be a huge award-winning storyline, and it can be a really important part of forming, like, once again, kind of reshaping Hannah Cheer's identity. And to give it to Dodger, who, let's be honest, Danny Mac isn't really viewed as being the most talented actor, but this is a good challenge for him to talk about, and it's a good thing to have him show, does he have the range? And I think it's a really important thing to do. Michael 1988 Chelsea FC, bad football team, by the way, says, this is really not a topic that's brought within our society. This cannot be swept under the carpet. You never get over anything like this. Exactly. The scars, the trauma will, Dodger, there's a lot of trauma to work through. And I mean, we've even kind of seen it with Frankie Osborne and her processing her trauma in a different way. So, yeah, I think it's a bold stance. I think it will inevitably get a lot of disgust and a lot of hatred. But I also think a lot of people who don't necessarily watch Hollyoaks will also point at this and go, wow, look at how gross Hollyoaks is for depicting this. And I think a lot of people will try and take this angle where it's like, we are better because we don't have this in such like grotesque detail. But I think it's a choice they made how to display it, and it's going to be an important storyline. They are working with a charity, and they've worked with a charity for years about these storylines. And remember John, Paul and Finn and Luke Morgan and his vicious attack. I think it's something Hollyoaks tells really well, so I'm not particularly worried about it kind of being used for shock value. So, yeah, I know a lot of this video is going to be dominated by it, and maybe I'll make a chapter to try and separate it, so if you can just look at the other stuff. But with all that said, I think it's a very bold move to do, and as long as they handle it correctly, I do believe this will be one of the more memorable Hollyoaks storylines, just like the Frankie and JJ storyline was. So yeah, now let's take the air out, let's ease the tension. Paul Flint once again says, been watching Hollyoaks for many years now. They do the best storylines, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, Hollyoaks is one of my favorite storylines of all time. So, right, now let's talk about the other stuff in the episode, which isn't as heavy. It does get a bit heavier later on, and once again, I'll do trigger warnings for it. But fundamentally, now we get a nice bit of reprieve from the grit. So we see that in the club you have Frankie, and she meets Esme, who is, once again, as I mentioned earlier, she's Jackie Dixon's daughter. Jackie Dixon was played by Alex Fletcher, who plays Diane Hutchinson. Obviously, we didn't see Jackie Fletcher, we only saw Diane in the episodes. But regardless, we see them kind of flirt and hold hands and get close, and they get intimate. They have sex, kind of in like the most like kind of dreamlike way, where you're on this beautiful balcony under the stars with blankets, and have a very close moment. They have sex, and then they just kind of talk about it. And Frankie goes, "Look, I was always so scared to be intimate, but and it's progression in her journey, because obviously they depicted sexual violence with Frankie, with JJ, so it's been a big thing for her to get over, because she's never really felt comfortable with intimacy. So, and she says, look, this was great and this was lovely, but I don't think I'm gay. And Esme just kind of goes, look, I can't say like, I am sad. My mom would love to meet you, but we shared this moment, and this moment will last forever, essentially. But unfortunately, Frankie swipes on what is basically Tinder, I would imagine, and she finds Sully, who is one of the criminals who are holding Gemma, Donnie, and Dodger hostage. Not the one who assaulted Dodger, and she likes his thing on a dating app, and let's assume that's how this character may potentially show up back on Hollyoaks. Then you have Warren gets back. Warren disarms the conflict and proceeds to... They then get into a car chase and they're hurling down. This as Dylan and Steve have a coming together. Dylan acknowledges that he doesn't want to be with Lucas anymore, and he's not about it, and he just doesn't want to deal with it anymore because it's not who he loves, and he wants to be with Steve. And Steve says, look, sometimes you just have to choose what's best for others instead of you. And they kind of go away, but then Steve's walking down the road. Dylan finds him, and they have a coming together, and Steve and Dylan kiss. And I've also seen a lot of controversy about this kiss as well, because obviously, Dylan is involved in a very popular gay couple ship in Hey Ray. And hey, technically it's still Hey Ray, guys. Technically. But point being, they have a big coming together, but they're in the middle of the road, and this is while Warren and Donnie are fighting. This is while they are kind of fighting. They're in a big car chase. The villain's car gets tipped over, and Warren and Donnie kind of stop and revel. Dylan and Steve get hit by the car, and Donnie finds the man who attacked Dodger, and he beats him within an inch of his life. The implication is that Donnie has killed the man, and Warren kind of realizes, we need to get out of here. Essentially, we need to leave. And this is as Lucas and Frankie find Dylan and Steve. And that's where the Hollyoaks later ends. All in all, I think that it's done its job. I think that Hollyoaks later had done a really good job at depicting it. It felt like a bit of a slow burn, Vicky and Charlie didn't really have much, and it was kind of interesting. Honestly, it feels like they wanted to do some intimate scenes, so mostly you had Frankie taking off her dress and showing her bra, essentially, and you had Gemma and Warren kind of implying that they were having sex, and they just mostly had people swearing. So, but it was a bit of a slow burn, all in all. It definitely took a while to get going, but I think fundamentally it stunned the audience, and I think that's done the job of the Hollyoaks later. I think this episode will live in infamy for a long time, simply because of how kind of dark and how gritty it got. So I think they did a good job. I understand the resistance. I understand the shock and kind of disgust. I think that's perfectly valid. I'm not going to disregard that. That's perfectly reasonable to have. But as Hollyoaks Later is a piece of Hollyoaks that is kind of always remembered. Maybe we don't remember the 4th of October episode of Hollyoaks, but you remember a Hollyoaks Later. So I think they've done a really good job of it. Obviously, I've been streaming this all on Twitch at the time, and a lot of the chat has kind of said, we like Hollyoaks Later, we wish it was more frequent, we wish it was probably annual. And I think that's definitely something that they should look at. They should definitely look at making Hollyoaks Later a regular thing. Because at the end of the day, it sets itself apart from other soaps because no other soaps tackle these issues like Hollyoaks do. And yeah, sure, it may be slightly campy, but in the same way, these episodes kind of represent, you know, a bit more of the older fandom, because Hollyoaks is always depicted as a younger fan base, and I don't necessarily think that's true. You have a lot of long-term fans who've been fans for years. So I think the Hollyoaks Later does represent more adult, and I think that's a part of the fandom that doesn't really get respected as such, doesn't really get appreciated. So I think my final message about the Hollyoaks Later is just to say that I think it's important that they do this more frequently, because once again, this episode, as disgusting as it was, I don't think will be forgotten very quickly. And it did a really good job to stand out within a high explosive, high octane week. Because you could just watch the anniversary, that'd be fine. But you watch Hollyoaks Later, and it's a completely different feeling. And I think that's a really impressive thing to do that Hollyoaks has done here. So, yeah, more of Hollyoaks Later, please. Paul Flint says, yes, Frankie's been through some very bad times. I was stunned by this slowly revelation. Whole episode was great. Hope they do more later episodes. A Christmas one would be cool. Yeah, I'd be down with that. Hollyoaks Later is meant to be very adult. Wish for more of them. Very much agree. And now I'm just going to do a bit of a kind of overall review of the anniversary week. It's not going to be super deep, and obviously, if people are still watching, obviously give your thoughts. I'll read them all out in the video. I think overall, I think this anniversary was a massive success. I think that you've hit the audience with a lot of sad, tragic deaths that will kind of upset the audience, but will be impactful. Because at the end of the day, you want deaths to be impactful, because otherwise, what's the point in doing them? And so, you know, we've lost Perry, we've lost Jez, we have lost Grace. Those characters who aren't exactly kind of pillars of storylines, but still, it matters. It matters that they died, and the legacy will kind of live beyond them as they've been immortalized in this anniversary. I think the stunt was a little clunky, but very Hollyoaks, and we can't judge it as if they have the BBC's budget. We can't really judge it as if they have Corrie's budget, because they don't. So I think within the grounds of what they had, I think they did a good job. I think they had a lot of cool set pieces. I think they had many different ways that the plane crash affected it. And I think that overall they did a genuinely very good job of this anniversary. With all that said, though, I do still want Hannah Cheers out. Essentially. And I know every Hollyoaks video comes back to this. I respect what Hannah Cheers has done. I appreciate it. Maybe in a couple years, maybe if we get a new producer, we'll look back on Hannah Cheers and say we were too harsh. But I think there are limits as to how far you should push some things. I think there are a lot of decisions being made that don't fully represent what the audience would want. And at some point, the shock value isn't really, you don't care anymore. And I think Hannah Cheers has reached the threshold. I think Hannah Cheers has... I think she's served her time. I want her to go, and I want a new producer to take the direction. Our lovely viewers say, Michael once again says, there's so many directions the show can go with all the new characters. True. Zach says, it felt slightly underwhelming due to the 3-episode-a-week format, but the shocking moments are definitely memorable and made the week. Yeah, 100%. That's a perfectly equates it. Can't agree more, mate. Paul Flint again. It's been very exceptional. Used to watch Brookside, so a nice callback. Great stunt week. Was sad Perry left, though. Liked her. The one thing I will say, and this is probably a bit bold of a non-Brookie fan to say this, I do have to acknowledge that the Brookside part was the weakest part. And that's fine, because I'm not a Brookside fan. I like the idea of Brookside, I've just not watched enough to understand much of the fan service. But I like the intertwining of the worlds, and I would like to see more of it. I want to see it explored more. I think that's a really important bit, and I 100% believe that they should keep doing this sort of stuff, because you're channeling into another world that has been untouched for ages. But alternatively, I don't trust Hannah Cheers to do it well. Michael says, Monday, Wednesday, Friday should have been the order if Channel 4 wanted 3 episodes a week. As someone who covers it weekly, please no. I like it being Monday to Wednesday. The Brookside crossover was overpromised and underdelivered for how much it was being bragged about. I do agree. I do feel like a lot of the build towards its anniversary was about the Brookside kind of revival, but it was such a small piece of the anniversary. And I like the bringing in of Mick as Donnie. I think that's cool, and I do think they're going to play into it a lot more. But if that was all you were doing, I'm not sure. But considering they will likely make Donnie a pretty big part now, he's crossed the line between being a good guy and a bad guy, by killing someone. So I think now is time to tell if it was worth it. So once again, I will reiterate, and just like Michael says, Hannah Cheers was put in a difficult place in the beginning, but it's time for her to go. And I think that's the sentiment we can all argue. She's done a really good job of this anniversary, but the position it was put in before and in the build-up to the anniversary was something that she had to write herself into. The exit of Tamara Wall as Grace Black, after being cruelly axed by Lucy Allen, only to be brought back by Hannah Cheers, only to be killed off again after she was written into a corner by these producers. It's not a pleasant thing to show. And we're even worried at the potential of what does Lucas's future look like. As Lucas, a formerly fan favourite in a very popular couple, now is becoming essentially an abuser. And yeah, sure, Stee has survived the same thing, but at the same time, there are limits as to how much you can claw something back. And yeah, Adam Burke says it perfectly. One good week does not make you producer of the year. Exactly. And I just want to salute all the work that Hannah Cheers has done, but I think the right time is for her to step down and to hand it over to someone else. You had a poisoned chalice, and I respect that. I do. But once again, perfectly put by Adam Burke, one good week does not make you producer of the year. And the messy, shoddily, shock value, trodden, how do we get this from A to B? Let's take the easiest option possible. Fundamentally, it's ruining a lot of the direction of the current show. But with that generally said, how would I grade, and I'll ask it to the chat as well, how would you grade this anniversary week? Let's say from either do 1 to 5 or do like A to F, whichever one you prefer. I would give this anniversary week a solid B. I think the direction leading into it was pretty rough, but I think a lot of the shock moments made it one of the most exciting weeks Hollyoaks has done in a long time. There are still some issues, there are still some things I didn't like, there are still some directions that they went that I don't exactly enjoy, but I would have to give it a solid B, I think the Hollyoaks later was pretty good. I think they proved a lot by it. And I also think the week was an event in itself. So all in all, I am pleasantly surprised by this week. I'm pleasantly surprised by it. But my ending message is once again, Hannah Cheers needs to step down. Anyways, that was the recap. Obviously, this is the final part of the recap. It should all be in a playlist if you want to go back and watch it. And if you want to see the edited down reactions, because I was streaming this whole week, that should be released on Friday, so tomorrow. And yeah, once again, I just want to kind of have it be publicly known once again. This was all live streamed on our YouTube. We've had tons of regulars in and out talking about the Hollyoaks with me, and that for one has made the experience fantastic. So we do this for all of the big events of the soap calendar. We do it for Christmas. We do it for and we do it for the big events where the episodes aren't dropped live. So I want to thank everyone who joined us, and I want to thank everybody who's made my day by joining me in chat. It has been truly fantastic. I'm going to read some more comments now, and then the video is going to end. The whole situation of Grace's character is what's done it for me in terms of Hannah Cheers. She'll be remembered for the JJ and Frankie story, I reckon. I believe that too. B2 was expecting the plane to hit the pub. Anyone else think that? It was pretty apt. B, good week, capped off with a dark late night episode that set up a new story. Perfectly said, Adam. Rodney Errington says it was shite. Dimitri Wright says probably a 4 out of 5. Michael says time for a new producer, but not Brian Kirkwood again. And Sean is trying to get Rodney to explain why they are wrong. And yeah, all right. So there we are. That's the coverage. Watch out for the reactions tomorrow. And I hope you enjoyed both the review and the recap. It's been great fun. But until we see more things that aren't released publicly or aren't released early, once again, the live streams are on a little bit of a breather until we get that next big event. But we will be back, and I hope you join us then. Anyways, thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.